Hi, welcome to Swag Space. I'm your host, Sam Swags, and happy House of Flame and Shadow Day to all that celebrate. Today's episode, we'll be talking about the new Crescent City book, House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. I can't believe the day is finally here that we're able to get our hands on this book after 2 years of sitting and waiting on pins and needles after that cliffhanger in House of Sky and Breath. As some of you may know, I have a group podcast with two of my best friends where we did a deep dive analysis of the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas in anticipation of this release. So I decided that maybe I would do some real-time reaction videos on my personal podcast and save the really big in-depth discussion with the two of them on Me, My Shelf, and I. I was able to get a reread done of both books. Granted, I got by the skin of my teeth with House of Sky and Breath. I literally finished it at midnight, so it's pretty fresh. I've really been looking forward to this book since it was announced, since the cliffhanger of Sky and Breath. Crescent City was my first Sarah J. Maas book, so I will always have a different connection and will always defend it in a way that some people may not agree with. I just really love everything about this universe. I love that it's urban fantasy. I think Bryce and Hunt are some of my favorite couples, and Bryce is one of my favorite female main characters for a lot of reasons. I just think Bryce and Hunt probably have the most realistic relationship. I think it's really natural. I really love the inclusion of magic in a modern world, and I think she does a really fantastic job of it. And I love the different neighborhoods and the different type of creatures that all live and cohabit the same space and the struggles with that. And look, I really do love ACOTAR. I still think it's brilliant. I see why it's the favorite of the three series, and I cannot wait to see what Sarah J. Maas has in store for these characters interacting for the first time. So I wanted to hop on before I really dug into the book to kind of establish where I'm at. It looks like this book is broken up into 3 parts, so I will just go ahead with each part and record after that. While books 1 and 2 are fresh in my head, I wanted to talk about some of the things I'm looking forward to in book 3, some questions I'm hoping we get answered. I'm assuming a lot of them will get answered in this book because Sarah J. Maas has said that Hunt and Bryce's story will be over in this one, but there are opportunities to expand in the Crescent City universe for future books. One of the biggest things that I think all of us are looking forward to is how the Dusk Court works in the Prythian ACOTAR universe. It's really brilliant to me when I was rereading how many Dusk references Sarah J. Maas made, specifically in the first Crescent City. I remember specifically highlighting a comment about Bryce's nail color being dusk colored. And kind of with that, trying to wrap my head around how of the Fae in the Crescent City universe, they seem to have 2 very distinct features from 2 different courts. You obviously have the Autumn King and his coloring reminiscent of the Autumn Court, but everything about Rune is very reminiscent of the Night Court, and obviously Rhysand. I will say, rereading it, I feel like Rune's abilities is definitely more of a mix between Rhysand's and Asriel's. All the references to Rune's shadows feels much more in line with Asriel. I know that Rhysand has the shadow and darkness abilities along with the mind reading that obviously Rune has, but there's something that feels much more indicative of Asriel in regards to some of Rune's abilities. And that makes me think that Az is associated with the Dusk Court in a way that we aren't aware of yet. Speaking of Az, I saw the teaser that she posted with the quote of Bryce, Nesta, and Asriel together, and I think that's going to be a really fun combo. I think Bryce and Nesta are so similar, and I'm sure they're going to butt heads, but I think it's going to be really fun, and it just makes sense that Nesta would be the one to go with Bryce, as they both have the connection to made objects and the cauldron, and then I feel like Az being there is also kind of foreshadowing his connection to the Dusk Court as well, along with being the spy master. I mean, that makes sense too, but I think he's got a deeper connection to the Dusk Court than we realize yet. I'm really looking forward to all of Lydia's POVs, because I read just a little bit of the prologue, and I'm like, man, this is going to be so good. I am so excited for this tortured soul watching the love of her life go through whatever he's going to go through. She's very complex, and I'm really curious to get her backstory, how she got roped into it, and how she's going to get herself out of the situation, because I don't think there's any going back to the way things were for Lydia at this point, especially now that she has a mate. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all the mythology around Thea and Thur and Helena, but I am super curious at how the world opened into Crescent City, and that became a whole new establishment, like what the draw was, why Thea would want to leave Prithian. I'm really excited to see how Ethan and Sigrid, the Fender alpha that can challenge Sabine, is going to shake out. I can't tell who's going to be the alpha. I think Ethan really has that ability, and I like the idea of it being a 1-2 of being a Fender and Holstrom back-to-back as the alpha and beta of their own pack. And then I'm wondering too, did fate bring them together? Could they be mates? And I just want the best for Ethan. After everything Ethan's been through, I really just want him, I think, to have a happy ending, maybe more than anybody else at this point. Not that I don't want Hunt and Bryce reunited, Hunt to survive, Rune not to die. Baxian deserves some semblance of a happy ending even though he lost his mate. Which, might I add, I totally had it in my head that Baxian died at the end of the second book, so I was very surprised that I forgot that he was actually down in the Asteri dungeon with Rune and Hunt. I'm nervous to see how much memory loss Hunt experiences after the end of the second book, because it sounds like his memories were wiped as the slave crown was re-tattooed on his forehead. And then also, I'm super, super curious to see if we are right that Hunt is actually a seraphim or if he is actually an angel, and there are angels in this universe. My biggest note or shift in my perspective on this series I've noticed is that I was able to forgive a lot of things that actually really bothered me in the first two books. Danica was just, especially by book 2, it was so exasperating. It's like, how can you do this to your best friend? How did you have so many secrets? Why does this keep coming up? Is she a scapegoat for any writing holes that maybe Sarah J. Maas got into? It was frustrating because I really just wanted to hope for the best for Danica and her relationship and love for Bryce, and by the end of the second book, I was just so burnt out with Danica's antics. That didn't bother me as much in this reread, which I was surprised. Another big thing that me, myself, and I friends have talked about is how initially we felt the arc of Hunt and Bryce's romance leading into book 2 felt really inorganic, that it almost felt like Sarah J. Maas wrote herself into a corner, teasing their relationship, giving us just the tiniest bit of spice and romance with it. But I had a moment thinking about how it actually tracks for Bryce, in my opinion, that she was going to take it a little bit slower with Hunt. It was specifically a comment in the first couple chapters of House of Sky and Breath, where Ethan, talking about Connor, was like, "It took my brother 5 years to get a date with this girl. You are 5 months into this. Good luck with getting anywhere with her." You know, looking back at Bryce's dating history, she never really dates. She is much more casual about sex, which is not inherently an issue. It's just an observation about just her patterns and how she dates and interacts with men. And there's very clearly a fear, a hesitation about opening up with men than it is to just have casual sex. And so for her to take it slower with Hunt, like she did with Connor, completely reframed this book for me in regards to their relationship. Because I would argue even that they were halfway mated by the first book. Maybe it wasn't consummated, but there's a scene where she's cooking for Hunt. That is the huge flag that someone is mated. The woman presents a meal to the man, and everything about their dynamic and their sexual tension explodes after she feeds him in House of Earth and Blood. And it just further pushes that point with them that they are mates. There's no Azrael in this. I don't know why I even somewhat humored it. It's just so obvious that it's going to be Hunt and Bryce, whether they survive or not. The one thing that I'm not as forgiving of still, even after my reread, is pretty much all of Therian's choices in House of Sky and Breath. I can't imagine anything with the Viper Queen is going to go well. And I think it's going to complicate things a lot more for the people that are still in Lunathian. And I can't imagine me being interested in reading a book about Therian past these initial 3. So I'm curious at what Sarah J. Maas's game plan is for Therian, because it's not there for me yet. Hopefully it will be by the end of this book, because I love this universe and I do love these characters. But yeah, I'm not sure yet. So anyway, I will cut to the chase and I will hop back on once I finish part 1 of House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. I will see you all in a little bit. And I'm back. I just finished part 1 of House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. Part 1 is really brilliantly called The Drop, and I think it's really fun to think of all the ways drop is utilized in this section, not only in reference to the drop ritual that we finally learn about in this section, the truth of it, the Asteri put together, but Bryce literally dropping and falling through things throughout this entire section. You know, starting with the end of House of Sky and Breath with her falling into Prithian. She falls into the Asteri coffin. She decides to fall out of Prithian, hoping to get back to Lunathian. So yeah, lots of dropping for Bryce throughout this section, and I'm sure she's not going to make it to Lunathian right away. She's going to go somewhere else. A nice mini little cliffhanger for this section. This is the section that also leaves off with Ethan having just killed Siggy and deciding last minute to abandon the rescue mission to hunt Rune in Baxian, which I've got a lot of complicated feelings on the Viper Queen, Therian, Ethan storyline. And then we also are left with Hunt having to decide if he's going to get Rune or Baxian killed in the Asteri dungeon, which, you know, makes me go back to Sarah J. Maas telling us for the past 2 years to be very afraid for Rune. I was hoping that it was just the whole, you know, chomping his hand off to try to break out of the prison was what she was referring to, but now I am actually really scared. Granted, it's not that I think that this is the section that will kill him per se. I have a feeling that all 3 of them will get out, but with the way that Rune is going right now, it's not looking great for him. And Lydia's storyline is probably the one that I've been excited for the most. Immediately from the prologue, got hooked, and I just can't stop thinking about how she's going to get herself out of this situation. And she is very much backed in a corner at this point, starting her rescue mission with the hope of Therian, Flynn, Declan, and Ethan to help her finish it. Once it was revealed that the Harpy was still alive, you knew that her time had come and that she needed to make her escape plan, not only for Rune's sake, but for her own protection and identity at this point. Overall, I really enjoyed this first section. I feel like Sarah J. Maas can sometimes do a really good job of giving us answers while keeping us guessing and wanting more. I'm saying that more specifically about the beginning with Bryce's interactions with the Inner Circle, and that interrogation I thought was really compelling. But on the flip side, it was a lot of information to wrap your head around when it came to the truth about Thea, Helena, and this missing sister, Celine. I find myself wanting more questions about the Dusk Court. Now that we have been confirmed of this land, I guess it really never was a court, because this island was for Thea, and in the description they said that the courts were established after. And in doing so, it almost seems like aspects of the Dusk Court have migrated into the Night Court, and that's why, obviously, now Rhys has access to the island. That is why I think Az seems to have a lot of overlapping features and abilities of Rune and Rhysand. I love how on pins and needles I am for Lydia trying to get out of under the Asteri, and I wonder if Rune's actually going to let her help him. And I hope he gets his hand back. I think the only thing that has been disappointing, which I had already kind of hinted at or voiced my lack of enthusiasm with, is anything to do with Therian, and it just further continues for me in this book. It just feels like the Viper Queen let Therian off very easily. I guess I just don't understand this little stunt that he did if it was only going to be for this small section. I don't like the idea that Siggy was just a plot point, and that this potential Fender heir to overthrow Sabine literally got her head chopped off by Ethan, just for him to have to deal with his own guilt. I just can't figure out Ethan's trajectory now. I really thought it was going to be much more intertwined with Siggy's storyline. And then this is all again because of Therian's weird escape from the river. Now he has nowhere else to go. Again, are people really just this big of a hot mess all the time? And he's got every right to feel this guilty, to have put that burden on Ethan. I guess it just speaks to Ethan's naivete too. I don't know. I'm just disappointed in Therian, period. And then we have the Bryce, Az, and Nesta dynamic. So I may have been a little optimistic about Nesta and Bryce like being friends or whatever. I still think it can happen. I'm going to stay optimistic for it. I know that Bryce didn't leave on like the greatest terms, but I think there's a way for them to recover that, especially with the hysteria involved. And I wonder if that pill that they gave her is going to stay with her so that if she does somehow come back, she can continue to communicate with them. Because at this point, they're going to need Bryce. Super curious to how that's going to continue to shake out now that she has attempted to leave. I say attempted because I know that she's aiming for Lunathian, but come on. What are the odds? This is Sarah J. Maas. So some of the other notes that I left while I was reading this section was how weird it was to think that only 2 days have passed from the end of House of Sky and Breath and the start of House of Flame and Shadows. Especially having to wait 2 years. It's supposed to be 2 days. Okay. Hunt and Rune and Baxian, JK, because I forgot Baxian was alive, Hunt and Rune have been tortured in my head for these past 2 years. I really think it was interesting. I don't know if anyone else had the same experience after the 2 years of waiting, the 2 years of thinking through. I did at least one ACOTAR reread during that time frame. I reread the Crescent City series before this, and it was so surreal to, again, we talk about it in Silver Flame a little bit in our other podcast, but how surreal it is to see the inner circle from an outsider's perspective, and not just someone from that universe, someone from another book series, that it was this moment of, wait, this isn't fan fiction anymore, this isn't theories, this isn't speculation, this is actually canon now. And with that, I really, really loved how Bryce always referred to Nesta as a warrior. Cassian would be so proud. It's just so perfect. I feel like Sarah J. Maas was kind of messing with her audience a little bit with describing the first scene of seeing Hunt, Rune, and Baxian, talking about how they ripped out his eyebrow ring and his lip ring, and it just makes me laugh for all of us girlies that were fawning over him in Chapter 3 of House of Sky and Breath, and I'm like, thanks, Sarah J. Maas. You knew what you were doing with that move. So my mind went a little extreme during one of the Hines' first POV chapters. So the first one was of her saying that she intentionally kickstarted her cycle. I took it very literally, and I was like, that can't happen to her because of what her and Rune did. Maybe. I mean, they are mated. That's probably not what it was in hindsight. My friend Liz made the point. She's like, well, she did it to kind of cover herself so that she didn't have to interact with Pollux. She didn't have to attend any of those meetings, and she could start working on her exit plan. I was like, that makes sense. She's not gonna get virtual knocked up. I made the other reference. This probably isn't true, but I am super curious about how Sarah J. Maas has the repeating number of 7 in this series. I feel like in a lot of her books. And thinking of that there are 7 circles of hell and 7 courts in Prythian, if there's any intentional reference to that, if that's just supposed to be the symbolism just of the number 7, is Prythian hell or vice versa. Towards the end of the section, when Bryce falls through the floor and uncovers the Asteri Vesperus in the coffin, I was really, really convinced that it was going to be Maeve from Throne of Glass. I mean, I still think it could be her, that she is an Asteri. I'm pretty convinced about that, but this one just wasn't her. If anything, I wonder if she is the missing sister, but I guess she was killed by the Star Eater. I mean, would we consider Aelin a Star Eater? That sounds like a very wrong theory, but we will see. With the discovery of the Harpy being resurrected somehow, I had this moment reading it with Lydia's panic, and I feel like she's being framed already. I guess maybe it's not her being framed, but it is her last possible out. Like, this is it. It's all or nothing. She's either gonna get the guys out of the basement, or she's going to die a slow and painful death alongside them. That urgency of that moment was so potent to me, and I've been on pins and needles every time it's her POV since. Last summer, I went and did my dream trip to the UK and Ireland, and I made sure to do a mythology tour in Dublin. It was a great tour, and what made it even more fun was I knew that Sarah J. Maas pulled from Irish mythology. I know Morgan is an Irish goddess of war and death, I believe, and we learn the history of the High Lords and the High Kings of Ireland. Realizing how inspired she is by Irish mythology, I'm going to dig back through my notes about that political structure, and I wonder if her end goal is to have Rhys be the High King with Feyre the High Queen, or if the inspiration was just for this backstory. If there once was a High King, he was overthrown, he was killed by Thea, and that's when the court system came into play. I really loved hearing the history from Celine's point of view, because she was written out of the Crescent City history because she didn't stay there. So Thea and Helena were written in because those are the two that stayed in Lunathian, as opposed to Celine, who made that cowardly escape. I love that Sarah J. Maas had already incorporated that into the first Crescent City book when they had all the bomb shelters closing down as all those demons attacked the city, and it was history repeating itself. I mean, it was just so brilliant. That was the exact same visual I had rereading the first book and remembering that scene and knowing that Juniper was one of the few that stood up for those people, and it just being the exact same thing of how the portal closed between Prythian and Midgard. You know, my friends and I, we definitely have our moments of thinking a bit more critically about ACOTAR, not necessarily in a we hate it or we don't like it kind of way, because Sarah J. Maas is such a hopeless romantic in regards to wanting those fluffy happy endings. I think she sacrifices a lot in the stories of ACOTAR for the sake of her characters that I don't think she really does in Crescent City, but that's just, I think, my preference. And what I can tell you is that while I may have my critiques on, I think, anything I love, like most people, Sarah J. Maas is unmatched, I think, in her ability to foreshadow and plan and really interweave her stories in a way I don't think anyone else really can. I'll always think of ACOTAR and ACOMAF and how those two will always be my favorite in the series because of how beautifully interwoven they are. And every time you reread the first one, you find more things that will reveal itself in the second. And that's exactly what she's doing here, and I am just eating it up. So I think that's about what I have for part 1 so far. Part 1, just as a reminder, ends with Lydia following through with her rescue mission, partnering with the Fire Sprite, Ethan backing out of the rescue mission after killing Siggy in the Viper Queen's den, and Therian being a hot mess and feeling guilty about it. And then we have Bryce as Nesta, really not doing well, and Bryce piecing out, using the horn to get away from them. I'm overall pretty grateful that seemingly / so far, this is our only time in Prythian. I think Sarah J. Maas was really tasteful in the way that she did it, that it wasn't the focus of it. I think the characters she used made sense. You know, even when we were in Prythian, we weren't really anywhere familiar until we hit the prison. And even then, it's always kind of been an anomaly. It's always felt like Prythian, but not. And I think the addition of the Heinz point of view has helped really round out the story too, and is really helping build up the suspense of it all. And I like that we were not getting the POV from the ACOTAR characters. It was always in context to Bryce's experience, never from them about what they're thinking about her, as much as they can in third POV. But I'm sure we're going to see some of the ACOTAR characters later in the book. But this was a nice little introduction, little section, and we're ready to move on for the next phase of Bryce's journey, because obviously we're going to need to get all the droid troves together. I'll be curious to see if the whole Asteri storyline ends here in Crescent City, or if this ongoing big bad is going to carry into ACOTAR 5. This feels much more like it is a Crescent City story, so I don't think there will be. And I am hoping for just at least one small other Throne of Glass reference other than the fact that the portal opened twice for 2 different types of Fae. I'm tired of talking about part 1 and I cannot wait to dig into part 2, so I will catch up with you later. And we are back. Part 2 of A House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. Part 2 is called The Search. My gosh, the emotional whiplash of this section, and I know what is eventually going to be coming, is just exhausting. This section was just really wild. We learn so much about all the characters. I feel like we get a lot of answers, and I think for me, this section is the one that made me realize how bonkers a lot of our crossover theories were going into this book. There were so many theories of who Hunt's father is, and my question earlier before I started recording this section of whether Hunt is technically fae or if angels are their own type of being in this universe. Thinking about all the Bryce Azrael shippers that are probably really disappointed. And even my very wild out there theory that there was some type of connection between Jezebel and Nesta, because I couldn't for the life of me figure out where Crescent City stood in regards to the timelines of the other universes. I almost expected Throne of Glass to be in the past, Akatar being in the middle, and then Crescent City being in the future. Not that they were necessarily overlapping. So we will just jump right into it. I think I'm going to do this section by character so I can talk about the POVs, some of the information we get, because I feel like there's a lot of information that is presented about pretty much every character. The first one that I'm most excited about and most fascinated by is Lydia's story. The fact that she survived the leap and that gunshot, and just the jaw-dropping reveal of her two teenage boys on that ship. I remember texting Liz when I got to the end of part 1 into part 2 with Rune screaming for Lydia, that it kind of gave me that "where's my wife?" that same level of anguish and devastation that I was hearing from Rune as I heard from Rowan in Empire of Storm. I like that while Rune finally opens up to the idea that everything surrounding Lydia and the Hind is more complex than it appears, she also doesn't let him off the hook right away, which I really love for her, and I think she deserves that space and that right to feel like a human being, and everything that makes her complex doesn't mean that it's necessarily good or right, and that she doesn't want pity for making those choices as a mother, which I feel like she was initially feeling from Rune. I'm super curious to hopefully learn more about those boys. I wonder if we will in future books, because I know that the Crescent City universe may not be over after this book because there is another house to explore. There's so many side characters, and I do really love that Rune and Lydia are finally taking the next steps into trying to figure it out. I think Rune deserves some space to wrap his head around who his mate is. I remembered reading somewhere that someone pointed out that Lydia's story feels very symbolic or has a lot of parallels to Rhysand's in Akatar and Akamath. And it pretty much is. I definitely see it now, especially because she was essentially playing a role for the greater good for her children once she finally got out of her bubble and realized the cause that she'd been working for is not what she should be doing with her life. These are not the people she should be working with. And now that I say it, thinking about Lydia's history of being a pawn to her father because she favored his abilities versus her mother really kind of brings part 2 into a full circle, with Bryce officially becoming the queen of the Fae of Avalon and the queen of the Valbaran Fae, where, we're meeting Flynn's sister Sathya, who is stuck in this predicament of being cattle, only value to breed, is a theme that's coming up quite a bit in this section. And Lydia is a product of that old way of thinking. Sathya is stuck in this in-between, in this marriage of convenience to not only save her ass, but for Tharian to finally feel like he's doing something productive with his life, which is going to be a whole other topic in a minute. That's very much what I feel like this section encompasses, is that empowerment of the female Fae out of this archaic patriarchal mindset. Lydia taking ownership of it, that while she participated in that mating ritual of her people, she actually made a choice once she found out she was pregnant to not continue to feed the cycle, just like Sathya decided to marry Tharian, even though she could have just went back to Lunathian, or she could have picked those creepy twin cousins of Bryce and Rune's. Bryce defying the odds of going into areas that were always off limits to the female Fae. The libraries, the Cave of Princes, and the irony of it all, that pretty much everything that's happening is happening because of female Faes from 15,000 years ago is the timeline of all this. It's nice to see Bryce kind of coming out of that along with it, that there are some Fae worth fighting for. They're not all going to be her father. I am ready to dig into Ethan now, because that boy, I didn't think someone could give Tharian a run for his money for being the biggest hot mess in this series, but boy, Ethan is doing the most. This poor boy. I am super curious about how Ethan's story is going to shake out, because my expectations for this Wolf storyline and Sabine and the Fender line is blown out of the water because I have no clue what's going to happen now. Between Ethan accidentally killing Siggy, to him defecting to Jezebel and the House of Flame and Shadows, asking to bring Siggy back, to find out that Hypaxia officially lost her crown that she had been freaking out about since book 1, that it was a little touch and go there. She was finally overthrown, and she is the necromancer that's going to help Ethan again communicate with someone from the dead. It was just wild to me. And then for Hypaxia to not be able to have enough control or power over Siggy because she is such a wild card, that she chose to come back as a Reaper instead of her humanoid form, which, I mean, let's think about it. We've watched all those horror movies of people trying to bring others back from the dead, and it backfires. So this was never going to go well to begin with, but for her to choose going down the Reaper path was also not what I was expecting. You know, I really thought that we were going to get enemies to lovers between Ethan and Siggy. I thought that's the direction it was going. They duke it out for the alpha role, and then it'd be this cutesy little happily ever after, moving the wolves into the right direction, and I was very, very wrong. And speaking of unexpected twists when it comes to character interactions and storylines, I definitely have to mention not only Jezebel, but the way that Ethan runs to her to try to help him with Siggy. Jezebel's clearly missing Bryce and needs a new assistant, so she kind of takes advantage of Ethan's needs and allows him to work for her. And surprisingly, Jezebel opens up to Ethan in a way that she never did with Bryce. And we finally learn her backstory, which I too was very wrong about initially, because everything about Jezebel's appearance and aesthetic definitely gave me Prithian vibes, so convincingly that she was also kind of giving me some Nesta vibes, and I was wondering if they were both Nesta in different timelines, and I was very wrong. So it was a very silly theory in hindsight, but Jezebel confirms that she was a priestess at Parthos, where the big library was, the majority of the books that she has saved. She was essentially one of the original inhabitants of Midgard and was caught trying to save the library by Apollyon and was cursed and punished for it. There's a lot more information to it than that, but that's high level Jezebel's story. And then she is the one, like I said earlier, working with Hypaxia to get Ethan Siggy back. It backfires, all that fun stuff. So what they decide to do, Jezebel's brilliant idea, a way to get our whole crew back together, is steal the Thunderbird's body to use her power to try to reverse what they did to Siggy becoming a Reaper. That body is on Avalon. Very clever, Sarah J. Maas. I'll give you that. Going back to Crescent City's reigning hot mess, Therian, as if he didn't put himself in hot enough water with the Ocean Queen, who has now cornered him in response to her sister, the River Queen, wanting its head, while also the Viper Queen wanting Therian's head because of the fire sprites. So what does Therian do? Instead of staying on boat arrest, house arrest, like the Queen wanted, to further question him, as our group is deciding to leave for Avalon, he jumps on their ship last minute and defies yet another queen. And then the icing on the cake of it all is his marriage to Satya. It's fine. At least you keep us on our toes. And then, let me tell you how convinced I was that Bryce accidentally fell into her father's home. I should have realized it was a plan. There was something behind it. She is just as quick and witty as Aelin. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. But that whole interaction with the Autumn King, she was so brilliant, planning on using her father and his obsession with multi-dimensions to get what information he had. She was kind of stuck. She didn't know what to look for. A lot of people don't know this bit of history, and he was easily the best resource in Lunathian. And she so played into his hands and his ego. It just was so satisfying. The only thing I do regret about his death, which really isn't much, it's my own selfish need, is trying to figure out what actually happened between Ember and the Autumn King. He was so convinced that he loved her and that it was an accident and he regrets it. We never truly got closure around it. I know that some people hypothesized that they might have been mates, and because she was human and he wasn't, it was so extreme for her that she didn't know how to deal with him, and he went off the rails tenfold. But I'm so glad that his death was a 1-2 punch with Rune and Bryce. They both deserved their shot at him, but Rune was the one that definitely deserved to finish him off. And I feel like in this book you really see, especially this section, you really see Bryce's growth as a character, as a leader, questioning the status quo of the way things were being run, things were being done. Sathya kind of also pushing her to think a little bit bigger about the fate of the Fae and leading the Fae, even though she's only really identifies with half of it, and watching her go from shutting down the Autumn King, putting him in his place before they go to Avalon, claiming the throne, but then her finally defeating both the King of Avalon and the Autumn King, and Rune stepping back, giving it to Bryce because he realized what the prophecy actually meant, that they needed a change and Bryce would be the one to usher it, is just really powerful. And then, kind of thinking about how this is all going to shake out, especially in regards to ACOTAR. Is this prophecy not that literal, that the Midgardian Fae are not going to be reunited with Terrasen or Prithian, that they're to reunite as a people? Or is Bryce going to be the leader of the Dusk Court? Are they going to liberate that prison, give the island its claim back? Yeah, I don't know if we're completely done with ACOTAR tie-ins just yet. It feels a little weird that it ended on the terms that it did in part 1. And now thinking of Bryce becoming a queen, I wonder if that's going to have any role in the physical geography in ACOTAR. Anyway, I love that Bryce and Hunt drink the infused black salt to communicate with Hel, and they finally break through. And we get a little bit more info dump on everything from Hel's perspective, how they would be able to help, that she needed to open the Northern Rift again. And this is when we finally learn about Hunt's lineage and his father, and that he was essentially a test tube baby of a demon from Hel and his mother, an angel. It's weird that because they admitted to Bryce and Hunt that they created the Thunderbirds to defeat the Asteri, but they were extinct. Then the next best plan was to create someone like Hunt that could be a backup to the Thunderbirds in Helena or Thea's master plan on how to ensure someone can reunite those 3 parts of the Starborn power. It was pretty abstract. I understood it in the moment. It's harder to re-explain it when there's so much else going on in the book series. I didn't hate it. It made sense to me at the moment about the Starborn power being split up between Thea, Helena, and Selene. They were waiting for the descendant that would be able to collect all 3, along with someone like Hunt to power her up to get her to defeat the Asteri. Seems like a very tall order. I'm glad that Bryce figured it out. And during their discussion with the Princes of Hel is when they figure out that the ley lines throughout the city created thin spots, and when there are multiple lines under one spot, that it became a way to communicate with other worlds. And also based on the conversation with the Princes of Hel and Hunt, I don't think that Hunt is a seraphim anymore. I think maybe there actually are angels in this universe. I feel like if that reveal was going to happen, that he could actually be a Fae descendant, it would have happened by now. I mean, there's 25-ish% of the book left. I don't expect Sarah J. Maas to throw an extra curve like that at us. There were some really sweet moments throughout this section that actually really choked me up. The biggest one was, I think, Lydia saying goodbye to her boys again and being as honest as possible without scaring them. Bryce and Baxi had a moment talking about Danica, that they are the only 2 in the world that know what it's like to miss that same person. There's no one else that would understand it than a best friend, practically sister, and your life partner like that. And then, because they were in Avalon, they weren't able to use their phones or any technology because of the mist and everything being so veiled and protected over there, that's when they finally learn about all the attacks happening in the human district. And that's when Bryce devises a plan that now that Avalon's hers, that they can become a refugee space for their friends and family, regardless of the outcome of this war. She sends Therian to try to make peace with the River Queen, that maybe they would be willing to take some refugees that Bryce may not be able to get to in time. We'll see how that shakes out for him. Yeah, I'm kind of hoping we get a little bit more of a resolution with our friends in Akatar and Prithian. I am overall really grateful that Sarah J. Maas has kept it pretty minimal. I kept it to just the first part of this book because at the end of the day, this isn't an Akatar book, this is a Crescent City book. But I just have a feeling that the actions that happen in this book are going to set the story for the rest of the Akatar books. So that's why I'm hoping that there's another little tie-in. Bryce leaving in such a huff and them angry at each other is not the greatest term, so I hope that somehow works itself out. Really hoping everything with Ethan works itself out too, because that has been driving me bonkers this entire book. I really hope that Lydia and Rune make it out alive. I'm very nervous for them. I'm so glad they're getting there, and I hope that we see it, and it's forever and always, because my little heart will not handle it. Anyway, it's time for me to devour part 3. I think this book will emotionally compromise me, so we will see how this final recording goes. I'll see y'all in a little bit. Alright, I did it. House of Flame and Shadows is done. I have a lot of complicated feelings about this ending. I think overall this book is a really lovely ending to Bryce and Hunt's story and the Crescent City universe as a whole. I think my biggest thing and my biggest problem with this book is more of Sarah J. Maas's lack of follow-through with the concept of this multiverse, this overlap. You know, I'm willing to concede that a lot of us really kind of hit the ground running at the end of book 2, really excited about this crossover, and we let our imaginations get to us, and that's okay, and I'm willing to accept that. I know that I definitely went down some rabbit holes with fan theories, but I think even beside that, with the potential of me having set myself up for failure in regards to my expectation, I really just don't think she followed through at the end. I think Sarah J. Maas spent an appropriate amount of time with Bryce and Prithian. I applaud her for that pacing. That way Crescent City didn't become an additional Akatar book. I like that there was a bit more Throne of Glass references, especially in regards to Lydia, that I really appreciated, which is also a bit sad to me, just knowing how much I remember loving Aelin and Rowan, and to think that their descendants were such horrific people that Lydia had to grow up and surround herself with really upsets me, and also makes me really curious about what happened in the time since Aelin and Rowan at the end of Kingdom of Ash to where we see Lydia today. I thought one of our Crescent City characters would wind up in Prithian permanently as some type of Dusk Court leader, but Bryce's comment to Nesta at the end of Part 3, The Ascent, makes me curious about Nesta's place in the Night Court. It almost felt like she was foreshadowing that Nesta may end up taking the Dusk Court because of the way her and Rhysand seem to keep butting heads. And after this book, I feel like there are more questions for Nesta than answers, and I think we're going to get more of her POV in the next Akatar book, whether fans are going to like it or not. I just don't see another way around it. Nesta's story really is just beginning. You know, I'm glad that we had at least one more moment of a nod or conversation with our friends in Prithian, because as I'd mentioned during my part 2 recording, I thought it was a little odd that might have been the only Akatar interaction we had. Granted, I think Bryce just dumping her parents on Nesta in the Night Court was a little shitty, especially without Cooper, this child that she pawned onto her parents, that they separated from him. What was she thinking? She figured Connor would be safe enough in Avalon if things go wrong, but not her human parents. Isn't Connor human too? Isn't that part of the problem? I started peeking at certain criticisms and comments about this book. High level, because I didn't want it to wholly influence my initial reaction. And the most common one that I see is people griping about Bryce and Hunt's loosey-goosey ability to wield the mask when they get it back from Nesta. And I never really saw it as a plot hole or an issue. It's very clear to me that Bryce and Nesta's connection is because they are both made. Bryce has the horn. Nesta literally came out of the cauldron. That is where I think their similarities are. But at the end of the day, Bryce has the Starborn power. And by the end of it, she's got all 3 parts that have been missing that she's been looking for this whole time. Oh, is that why the book's in 3 parts? That tracks. So, I don't know. I think it makes sense for me that Bryce would have an easier time wielding it and able to wield it multiple times. And then, again, throughout the entire book, we keep hearing about, because Hunt and Bryce are mates, that their abilities are merging, that they have bits of each other's abilities. So, of course, that would lend Hunt an upper hand at being able to wield the mask, even if it's just a fraction, because even when Bryce only had a fraction of that Starborn power, she was able to handle the mask a little bit better than Nesta was. I can understand why people are upset with that, but I think there are bigger glaring issues, like not only Pollux knowing that Lydia had 2 boys during his 10-15 year relationship with her, but then decides to steal them just to spite her. The only thing I can think of that would have happened that makes a little more sense, and maybe Sarah J. Maas should have just given a little context to how the kidnapping happened, because it sounds like Pollux boarded the ship trying to stop the refugees getting over to Avalon, and I bet the minute that he got on that ship, he smelled Lydia. And then when he hunted down the scent, who did he find? He probably found her boys. Pieced it together, the time that she faked her disappearance, the age of the boys, and he probably took them. I think that's the only thing that's getting me by, and that's what's just going to be canon in my head. Because if Pollux is that ruthless, that brutal, and that pissed at Lydia, he's going to do what he can to just ruin her life further, because she has effectively ruined his. And that's what small dick energy does. Circling back to Ethan, I think the perfect description of him in this book is, you know the phrase, it's not about the destination, but the journey. It's actually about the destination for him and not the journey, because his journey was just absolutely ridiculous. The emotional roller coaster of just that one chapter of him going to the wolves, trying to rally their support / safety for the impending Asteri showdown, and then them all turning on it because he killed a wolf, and Sigrid is there working with Sabine. She's so calculating and manipulative. She's using her poor niece as leverage, who's a fucking reaper. Like, what is that going to do to this girl? To, again, try to one-up Ethan, try to ruin his life further, for then the Prime to step in and be like, no, Ethan is my new Prime with parents. Sabine's like, F no, kills the Prime. Ethan, in his jacked up wolf form with magic, thanks to the antidote, is like, I can finally take you, Sabine. And he does. And I think that was the section that kept me on edge the most. I had no clue where Ethan's story was going, and I'm just so glad that's how it ended. Because, I mean, he deserves it, and it was just such a shit show of a story for him. He's literally had the worst couple weeks of his life outside of his brother being slaughtered. You know, in the same circle as Ethan, Hypaxia's journey is going to be really interesting. I'm trying to wrap my head around what it's going to mean for her to be the new leader of the House of Flame and Shadows. As a witch, and also as a necromancer, that's just going to be a really fun combo. I wonder how that's going to shake out in book 4, because book 4 is going to focus on the House of Many Waters, so we're not done with Therian. Maybe he'll be a little more tolerable in the next book. I have hope for that. But knowing that Hypaxia and him are so close, I'm hoping that we'll get more Hypaxia, because I'm really intrigued with how it's all going to shake out for her. I really don't like the way Sarah J. Maas let Celestina off the hook so easily at the end with the Harpy and Isaiah and Naomi. I'm all for the redemption arc. I'm all for giving characters a second chance. I think it's hard for me to be willing to do that because we have not seen the growth. We were just told after she literally let Hunt, Rune, and Baxian rot in the Asteri basement, the murder in the meadows of all those humans and those children, and then she decides to join Isaiah and Naomi and is all like, boo-hoo, my girlfriend broke up with me because I turned you in, and now I'm really sad, and now I know that I did the wrong and obviously we think Hypaxia can do better now. Like, Celestina does not deserve her at all. And I don't know, I don't think there was a point to bringing the Harpy back at that point, where we literally just brought her back just to stir the pot a little bit at the Northern Rift. You didn't need to bring that character back. I guess we needed the motivator for Lydia to get out from the Asteri as soon as possible, and that's fine. Man, the Harpy should have been a looming fear from that point on, and I literally forgot about the Harpy until she came back at the end. And then can I finally bring up the fact that Ruin shot his mate to stop her from saving her children? What was he thinking? I texted Liz and I was like, did he really just do that? They literally finally got over all their BS. They finally were going to make it work. And he's like, no, I'm not going to let her walk into the trap. That wasn't the move, bud. I'm really disappointed in my favorite. That was wild, to say the least. I mean, Rin was right. I'm not sitting here denying that. Lydia was devastated. Slightly irrational. I feel like he could have found another way to stop her, slow her down. Especially being mates. What were they thinking? But I thought it was really sweet, though, that Rune was able to get the boys out. And, Lydia probably understood why she was maybe a little bit more willing to forgive him if she took care of her boys. Because I think she understood that she was being irrational. To have looked back and been like, yeah, I did almost walk into a trap, but I would have still done it anyway. And sure, he was right, but he still shot me. But if he takes care of my boys, maybe I'll forgive him. That tracks, I think, for her and for him. And I like that Rune had a little bit of time with her boys, I think. That shows his growth, his commitment, the boys' growth, and how they feel about Lydia and towards her. I never really had much stake in Jessica's character, who she was. Thought she was such a dick to Bryce, and I was just like, whatever, just some crotchety woman, whatever. And while I wish that her character had shaken out just a little differently, I feel like Jezebel could have been a really fun character to wield within the multiverse in this crossover, because she was so interesting, she knew so much. I do appreciate, the relationships that she built with Ethan in just this little bit of time, how much in hindsight she really cared about Bryce, and that she was willing to sacrifice herself for Bryce when she died saving their world. So while she's not my favorite, I do really appreciate the way that it shook out between the two of them. So on my Goodreads, I'll probably end up giving House of Flame and Shadow a total of 4 out of 5. Like I said, I think 5 out of 5 for the conclusion of Bryce and Hunt's story, but a 3 out of 5 because of the way that Sarah J. Maas just didn't commit to the crossover multiverse story of it all. I was joking with my friends, because of course I'm recording this right after Taylor Swift announced her newest album, and I turned to one of my friends, I was like, I wonder if this is why I'm slightly disappointed in the execution of Sarah J. Maas's crossover storyline, is because I'm so used to getting so many Easter eggs and teasers from anything Taylor Swift does in regards to her marketing, social media, all of that, and there's always just that payoff that there's always something to look forward to, and I just didn't get that here. But on the other hand, I'm very, very sentimental about the fact that this is the end of Bryce and Hunt's story. They are finally rid of a bulk of the monsters that have been holding them in place, essentially captive. And I do really want to come back to this universe at a slightly later time to see how things evolve. Did they figure out a way to utilize some type of power electrical system in an alternative to the First Light? And what does their new political system look like? And then now without the Asteri or the Archangels as like the number 1-2 combo, isn't the Viper Queen just going to go further unchecked? And how does this affect the Water Courts, because they were always of this universe? Are their lives really going to be impacted without the Asteri? And then all the humans, if they're not fighting the Veneer, are they going to crumble back into a Veneer versus human world? Are they going to start being able to cohabitate together a little bit better without the Asteri? And now that, Truth Teller and Starborn Sword are in Prithian, what is that going to mean for them? Are there other Asteri in coffins on other worlds in this universe? There are really a lot of things to consider. I think I might do one more quick check-in after I read the bonus chapters. I am a little bit into them. I'm not going to say which ones I've started reading. But I think it would be really fun to talk about, because already the 2 that I've read have given me so much more context and appreciation for some characters and the resolution of some storylines that I would love to talk about. But I will sign off for now and get those chapters read and hop back on with those final thoughts as well. All right, this will be the last check-in, talking really quickly about the bonus chapters. They were all really cute and fluffy, mostly just little happily ever after blurbs. I'm a little biased. Rune and Lydia was probably my favorite, and I went out of my way to try and find the Target exclusive edition and found one in stores, so I'm glad I was able to get that copy. The only thing I think of note about these chapters is I actually feel like the Ember and Randall chapter should have been left in the book. There's so much information about the state of Prythian, especially Nesta's dynamic within Prythian and the Night Court, and I feel like the references to Nesta and Rhysand still butting heads is really important, because by the end of Silver Flame, I figured they had drawn a line in the sand, made some peace, and moved on. I knew they wouldn't be friends per se, but based on everything that happened in House of Flame and Shadow, I'm really nervous for their relationship, and I just can't imagine what the next book is going to be like. I have my suspicions that Nesta's POV is not over yet. I think it might actually be a Nesta Azriel book, not just an Azriel one. It's also leaving me wondering if we are going to continue down the storyline of the Dusk Court and if Nesta and Azriel are going to be key players in it. I had said before that Rune's abilities seem to be more of a mix between Rhysand and Azriel's, obviously leaning more towards Rhysand, but there's something that I can't quite ignore when it comes to Rune and Azriel. And I almost wish that they had kept in the chapter with Nesta, Azriel, and Bryce playing around with their phone, taking pictures, listening to music. Not because the chapter itself was important or held any significance, but I feel like we saw more bonding and relationship building in that chapter than we did in any of the ones that were actually left in the book. That bonus chapter made it make much more sense to me of why Nesta was willing to help Bryce out. It felt very random in part 3, the more I think on it. That chapter with the three of them showed their mutual respect for each other, and I wish we had gotten a hint of that in the other chapters. I really appreciated the Bryce and Danica chapter of her getting the horn tattooed on her, but it kills me because I cannot figure out where that chapter should have landed in the book. Where would that flashback have been pertinent in House of Flame and Shadow as a whole? Could have been a bonus chapter from another book, maybe the first one, where we actually witness part of Danica's last days. But yeah, nothing too crazy when it comes to my thoughts on the bonus chapters. Like I'd said, they were just kind of fluffy, happily ever afters. I should look into and see which chapters are the fan favorites. Like I said, I'm a little biased towards Rune and Lydia, and based on the reaction I've been seeing online, they seem to be the new favorites. I enjoyed the Bryce and Hunt one. I will always love and enjoy them. But anyway, I think that is a wrap on my House of Flame and Shadow reaction episode. I will be back with more either book reactions, analyses, some new topics I've been considering talking about, so I'll keep you posted on that. Anyway, thanks for tuning in.